The town of Calder Ridge rested between a slow grey river and a long empty highway that carried strangers past without reason to stop. It was a quiet American place where mornings began with the smell of coffee drifting from a single diner and ended with porch lights glowing softly through the dark. Nothing important was supposed to happen there. Nothing that could last long enough to become legend. Yet one story refused to fade. At the far end of Willow Bend Road stood a small white house that had not welcomed a visitor in half a century. Paint curled away from the wood like old paper. Grass climbed the porch steps as if nature itself wanted to close the door forever. Only one thing remained untouched. An upstairs window that caught the evening light and held it too long like an eye that would not blink. People in Calder Ridge learned not to look at that window for very long. Not because they believed in ghosts, but because the house reminded them of a question that had never been answered. 50 years earlier, a man named Corvin Hale had vanished from inside that house. No sign of struggle. No packed suitcase. No goodbye. Just silence that settled into the walls and stayed. Search teams walked the riverbanks for days. Neighbors repeated the same small details until memory wore thin. Law officers filled reports that led nowhere. Time moved forward the way it always does. Slowly at first. Then all at once. The town buried the mystery beneath routine and careful forgetting. But silence is never empty. It waits. On a cold October morning long after most people believed the story had ended, a woman named Aloan Hart stepped off a northbound bus and into the thin pale sunlight of Calder Ridge. She carried one suitcase. No map. No visible reason to be there. Wind pushed fallen leaves across the pavement in restless circles around her shoes. Somewhere far off a train horn sounded low and lonely. The sound seemed to stretch across years instead of distance. Aloan stood still for a moment as if listening for something deeper than noise. Her face held the calm patience of someone who had spent much of life in quiet rooms among forgotten things. Silver traced lightly through her dark hair. Not a sign of age alone, but of time spent thinking instead of speaking. She had never lived in Calder Ridge. Yet the air felt strangely familiar. Like a memory she could almost reach but not fully touch. In the pocket of her coat rested a folded letter softened by being opened too many times. The paper carried only 12 words. He did not disappear. Someone watched. The truth is still inside the house. No name. No return address. No explanation. At first she believed it was meant for someone else. A mistake traveling through the postal system. But 3 weeks later a second envelope arrived with no stamp and no writing inside except a single photograph. The photograph showed the White House on Willow Bend Road in bright summer light. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. Curtains lifted slightly in an upstairs window. And behind the glass a shadow formed the shape of someone watching the camera. On the back of the photograph a date had been written by hand. June 3, 1975. The night Corvin Hale vanished. After that Aloan stopped trying to ignore the letters. Some quiet pull stronger than reason began guiding her toward a place she had never seen. And so she came to Calder Ridge carrying questions that did not belong to her past yet somehow felt connected to her life. Inside the town diner warmth wrapped around her as the door closed against the cold morning air. The room smelled of coffee bacon and something sweet baking in the kitchen. Small conversations filled the space in low familiar rhythms. When Aloan entered the voices softened just slightly. Not unfriendly. Just careful. Strangers always carried the possibility of change and small towns respected stillness. She chose a booth beside the window where weak sunlight spread across the table like thin water. Her suitcase rested near her feet. The photograph lay hidden beneath her hand. The waitress poured black coffee without asking many questions. Kindness shaped by habit rather than curiosity. Aloan thanked her quietly and wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Heat moved slowly into her fingers, grounding her in the present moment. Outside a truck passed along the empty street. Its sound faded quickly, leaving the town suspended once more in near silence. She unfolded the photograph again. The edges were worn soft. The shadow in the upstairs window seemed darker inside the diner light. Watching. The word rose in her thoughts uninvited. She studied the image, carefully searching for proof that it was only a trick of sunlight or reflection. But the longer she looked, the more certain she felt that someone had truly been there behind the glass. Someone who might have seen everything. "You picked a quiet week to visit." The voice came from the counter, gentle but steady. Aloan lifted her eyes. An older man sat a few stools away. Broad shoulders slightly bent with years. A heavy coat worn smooth at the edges. Pinned to it a sheriff's badge that suggested retirement rather than authority. His gaze rested not on her face but on the photograph in her hand. Recognition flickered there before he hid it beneath calm. She answered softly. "I did not know there was a busy week." A faint breath of something like humor passed across his expression, then disappeared. "Most weeks stay quiet here." He paused. "Most people who pass through do not stop at that house." The words settled between them heavier than conversation should feel. Aloan sensed the careful boundary in his tone. The line between what was spoken and what remained buried. She could have thanked him and let the moment end. She could have left the photograph folded forever. Instead, she asked the question already waiting inside her. What happened there? The diner seemed to grow still around them. Even the low kitchen sounds felt distant. The retired sheriff looked toward the window rather than at her. Toward trees hiding Willow Bend Road somewhere beyond sight. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly. Nothing that was ever proven. Not denial. Not truth. Only the space between. He placed a few bills on the counter. Nodded once to the waitress. And walked out into the cold morning light without another word. The bell above the door rang softly as it closed. The sound lingered longer than it should. Aloan watched the empty doorway, understanding something she could not yet explain. The silence in Calder Ridge was not peaceful. It was protective. Hours later, guided by directions given with reluctance, she stood at the beginning of Willow Bend Road. The sky had turned pale with approaching evening. Wind carried the dry scent of distant water and fallen leaves. The White House appeared slowly through thin trees. Smaller than the photograph suggested. More fragile. As if time itself had grown tired of holding it upright. Paint peeled in long faded strips. The porch leaned slightly toward the earth. Grass rose high around the steps, untouched by footsteps for years. Yet the upstairs window remained clear. Perfectly clean. Reflecting the dimming sky like open glass waiting for light. Her heartbeat slowed not from calm but from certainty. The strange feeling that every step she had taken in life had been leading quietly toward this place. She did not know who sent the letters. She did not know why the truth had waited 50 years. But she felt the presence of a story unfinished and patient. Aloan moved forward until the porch stood only inches away. Wood creaked beneath her, weight sharp in the still air. She climbed the steps slowly, listening to the fragile sounds of age beneath her shoes. At the door she paused. Hand hovering above the cold metal knob. The world felt suspended between breaths. Then from somewhere inside the silent house, very faint, almost lost beneath the whisper of wind, came a sound. Not clear footsteps. Not the settling of old wood alone. Something softer. Like movement remembered rather than real. Like a secret turning over after years of sleep. Aloan held her breath, listening deeper into the quiet. The sound faded, leaving only stillness. Yet certainty remained. She had not imagined it. Someone watched. The words from the letter returned stronger than before. And with them came a new question forming slowly in the shadows of her thoughts. What if the witness inside this house had never been a person? What if the truth had been waiting all these years? Not hidden. Only unheard. Her fingers closed gently around the doorknob, cold as river stone. In that fragile moment, balanced between past and present. Fear and purpose. Silence and revelation. Only one question remained. If the silent witness was finally ready to speak, was she ready to hear the truth? ACT2 The journey begins. Aloan did not open the door right away. Her hand rested on the cold metal knob while the quiet of Willow Bend Road pressed in from every side. The air felt heavier here, as if the years themselves had gathered around the house and refused to move on. She listened again for the sound from inside. Nothing. Only the thin whisper of wind sliding along the broken paint and the distant murmur of the river beyond the trees. For a moment doubt tried to return. A careful voice in her thoughts asking why she had traveled so far for a mystery that did not belong to her life. But another feeling stood stronger than doubt. A quiet pull she had known since the second envelope arrived. The sense that something unfinished had been waiting not just for anyone, but for someone willing to stay. Slowly she turned the knob. The door opened with a long dry breath of sound like wood remembering how to move. Dust drifted in the narrow line of light spilling across the floor. The smell inside carried aged paper and something faintly metallic that had no clear source. Aloan stepped across the threshold. The silence inside the house felt different from the silence outside. Not empty. Not peaceful. More like a room where a conversation had stopped suddenly and never begun again. She closed the door behind her and the soft click echoed farther than it should have. For an instant she felt as though she had sealed herself inside a memory. The front room held only shadows and pale outlines where furniture had once stood. Wallpaper peeled in thin curling shapes. A clock without hands rested crooked on the wall. Every object seemed paused mid-sentence waiting for the rest of the story. Her footsteps moved slowly across the floor, careful not to disturb what little remained. Dust rose in faint clouds around her shoes, then settled again. Near the far wall she noticed something unexpected. A narrow wooden table still standing straight while everything else leaned with time. On its surface lay a single glass jar empty except for a folded scrap of yellow paper inside. She hesitated before touching it. Not from fear, but from the strange respect people feel when standing close to another person's final moments. When she lifted the jar, the dust beneath it revealed a clean circle untouched for years. Proof that someone had placed it there after everything else had been abandoned. Her pulse quickened. The folded paper inside the jar was brittle with age. She opened it carefully, worried it might break in her hands. Only 3 words were written in faded ink. Not finished yet. The message felt less like a note and more like a promise left behind for time itself. Aloan read it again, searching for meaning between the letters. But meaning stayed hidden. She placed the paper back inside the jar and looked slowly around the room. The house no longer felt completely empty. Someone had returned here once. Long after the disappearance. Long after the town decided to forget. The question was who? And why? A faint sound came from above. So soft it might have been nothing more than old wood shifting with the cold. Yet it came again. Gentle. Measured. Almost like a footstep remembering the shape of walking. Aloan lifted her eyes toward the staircase. The railing curved upward into shadow where the second floor waited unseen. The same floor where the clear window faced the road. The same place where the photograph captured that silent watcher 50 years earlier. Her breathing slowed as she listened. Fear did not arrive the way stories often describe. No sudden terror. No urge to run. Only a deep awareness that every answer she sought rested somewhere above her. And that turning back now would leave the question alive forever. She placed one hand on the railing. The wood felt cold and steady beneath her fingers. Solid despite the years. Step by step she climbed. Each movement careful. Each creak of the stairs sounding louder than expected. Halfway up she paused. Because the air carried a faint scent different from dust and age. Something softer. Almost like old cedar or paper warmed by sunlight. Not the smell of abandonment. The smell of presence. Her heart moved faster now, not from panic but from recognition. The same feeling she experienced when opening forgotten archive boxes in silent rooms. The moment before truth reveals itself quietly without warning. At the top of the stairs, a narrow hallway stretched toward a closed door at the far end. Faded photographs hung crooked along the walls, their images too dim to see clearly. Time had blurred the faces into shapes without names. Aloan walked slowly past them. A strange sadness rising in her chest for lives she would never know. Near the final photograph she stopped. Unlike the others, this frame had been cleaned recently. No dust. No fading. Inside it was a picture of the White House taken from the road. But the date printed in the corner was not from 1975. It was from only 3 months ago. A quiet chill moved through her arms. Someone had been here. Not in the distant past. But now. Recently. close enough that the memory of their presence still lingered in the air. The closed door at the end of the hallway waited in silence. Aloan approached slowly, every step carrying the weight of 50 unanswered years. When she reached the door, she noticed a thin line of light beneath it. Warm. Faint. Impossible. No electricity had reached this house in decades. The town records were clear about that. Yet light remained. Her thoughts tried to form explanations. None felt strong enough to believe. She raised her hand and knocked once. Soft. Respectful. The sound faded without response. For several seconds nothing moved. Nothing changed. Then from the other side of the door came a voice. Not loud. Not threatening. Simply calm. You took longer than I expected. Aloan's breath caught halfway between inhale and sound. Every question she carried seemed to press forward at once. She forced herself to speak steadily. Who are you? A quiet pause followed. Not hesitation. More like patience choosing the right moment. The voice answered. Someone who has been waiting for the truth to matter again. The words settled deep inside her. Strange and heavy and somehow familiar. She tried the handle. Unlocked. The door opened slowly. Warm light filled the hallway soft as late afternoon, even though evening had already begun outside. Inside the room stood a single desk covered with papers, photographs, and small labeled boxes. A lantern burned gently at one corner, casting steady gold across the walls. And beside the desk stood a person Aloan had never seen. Yet in an unexplainable way felt she already knew. Not young. Not fragile. Eyes carrying the same quiet patience she recognized in herself. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was recognition unfolding slowly between strangers connected by the same unanswered story. Finally the stranger said, You came because of the letters. Aloan nodded, unable to trust her voice yet. Another pause. Then, good. Because the witness is finally ready to be heard. 1,000 questions rose inside her at once. But one moved forward stronger than the rest. What witness? The stranger looked toward a small wooden box resting alone at the center of the desk. Unlike everything else, it appeared untouched by time. Carefully protected. Deliberately saved. When the stranger spoke again, the words were almost gentle. The only one who saw what happened the night Corvin Hale disappeared. Aloan felt the room tilt slightly around her. Not from fear, but from the sudden closeness of truth after 50 years of silence. She stepped nearer to the desk, eyes fixed on the small wooden box. Her voice barely more than breath. Why wait until now? The stranger's expression softened with something like sorrow. Because some truths destroy a town if they arrive too early. And some truths destroy a life if they arrive too late. Another quiet moment passed. Then the stranger placed a hand lightly on the wooden box and said, It is time. AC3 the weight of what was seen. The room felt smaller once the words were spoken. It is time. They did not echo. They did not rush. They simply settled into the quiet like something that had always been waiting for this exact moment. Aloan stood beside the desk with her hands still at her sides, afraid that even the smallest movement might break whatever fragile truth lived inside the wooden box. The lantern light moved gently across the surface of the wood, revealing scratches worn smooth by years of careful handling. Someone had protected this object not as evidence alone, but as memory. Her voice came slowly. What is inside? The stranger did not answer right away. Instead, they studied Aloan's face with calm attention, as if measuring not curiosity, but readiness. Outside, the wind touched the house in soft, uneven breaths. The sound traveled through the walls like distant whispering. 50 years of silence listening for what would happen next. Finally, the stranger spoke. Before you see it, you need to understand the night it was made. Aloan felt a quiet tension rise in her chest. Not resistance, but the sense that truth was never a single moment. It was a path, and she had only just stepped onto it. She nodded once. The stranger moved to the chair beside the desk but did not sit. Their hand rested lightly on the back of it as they began to speak. Corvin Hale was not the kind of man people feared. He fixed broken engines, helped neighbors during winter storms, paid for coffee he never drank just to keep the diner open during slow months. Most people believed they knew him. And maybe they did. At least the parts of himself he allowed the world to see. But during the spring of 1975, something in his life began to change. He stopped staying long in public places, stopped laughing as easily, started locking his door even during the day. Small things, easy to ignore, easy to forget later, until the night he vanished. The stranger's voice remained steady, but something deeper moved beneath it. Not anger, not grief alone, something closer to unfinished responsibility. That evening the river flooded after 3 days of heavy rain. Roads closed. Power lines failed. Most of Calder Ridge went dark before midnight. Storms have a way of hiding truth, or revealing it. No one was certain which this one chose. Aloan listened without moving, each detail settling carefully into her thoughts. She could almost see the town as it must have been. Dark streets, rain against windows, people waiting for morning. The stranger continued. Near midnight, someone came to Corvin's house. Not a stranger. Someone he knew well enough to open the door without fear. What happened next? No one reported. No one admitted. No one explained. Only silence. Search teams found nothing. The river carried away any trace the storm might have left. And by the time the sun returned, the story already felt impossible to solve. So the town did what towns often do. It protected itself. Aloan understood the meaning beneath the words. Protection and silence often walk together. She asked quietly, "And the witness?" The stranger's eyes moved to the wooden box again. Was never questioned, because no one realized it had seen anything at all. A faint chill moved through Aloan's arms. The same feeling she had when reading forgotten letters written by people long gone. Moments preserved without knowing their future importance. Why keep it hidden? She asked. Because truth needs the right listener. The stranger said. Someone who does not belong to the fear that buried it. Their gaze returned to her. Soft but certain. Someone like you. Aloan felt the weight of those words more deeply than she expected. She had spent her life among other people's memories, never imagining one might one day choose her in return. The room grew quiet again. But this silence felt different. Not empty. Waiting. At last the stranger lifted the wooden box, holding it with careful respect before placing it gently in front of Aloan. The sound of wood touching the desk was almost nothing, yet it seemed louder than any storm. Her hands hesitated above the lid. For a brief moment doubt returned. Not about the journey, but about what truth might change once it was known. Some stories end when they are solved. Others only begin. If I open this, she said softly, nothing in this town will stay the same. The stranger answered without hesitation. It never truly stayed the same. People only pretended. A long breath moved through Aloan's chest. Slow, unsteady, human. Then finally, she lifted the lid. Inside the box lay something smaller than she expected. Something ordinary enough to be overlooked for decades. A cassette tape, carefully wrapped in thin cloth, labeled in faded handwriting. June 3. Her pulse quickened. A recording. A voice from the past waiting 50 years to be heard. She looked up at the stranger. How? The power failed that night, they said. But Corvin owned a battery recorder. He used it to capture river sounds for reasons no one understood. The storm hid many things, but not everything. Aloan felt the fragile weight of the tape as she lifted it from the box. So light, yet carrying half a century of silence. Do you know what's on it? She asked. The stranger shook their head slowly. I never listened. The answer surprised her. Why wait? Because once heard, truth cannot return to silence. And I needed someone who could carry it further than I could. The meaning settled gently but firmly. This moment had always been meant for her. Near the lantern sat a small portable player, worn with age but carefully maintained. Prepared. Waiting. Aloan placed the cassette inside with steady hands that did not feel steady at all. Each movement seemed to echo through the years behind her. When she pressed play, nothing happened at first. Only soft static, thin and distant like wind moving through another time. She wondered if the tape had been damaged, if 50 years had erased the only witness forever. Then, a sound emerged. Rain. Heavy. Close to the microphone. And beneath it, a door opening. Aloan's breath stopped. The past was no longer silent. A man's voice followed. Low. Uneasy. You shouldn't be here tonight. Another voice answered. Quieter, but clear enough to carry something sharp inside it. I didn't come to talk. The room around Aloan seemed to disappear, leaving only sound, only memory unfolding in real time. Rain striking wood, floorboards shifting, two lives moving toward a moment neither could escape. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared she might miss the next words. The second voice spoke again. You left me no choice. A long pause filled with storm and breath. Then Corvin Hale said something so soft it almost vanished beneath the rain. There was always a choice. Silence followed. Deep. Terrible. Final. And then, a single sound. Not thunder. Not the storm. Something closer. Closer than anything else. Aloan felt cold move through her entire body. Because even without seeing it, she knew. The witness had captured the exact moment everything changed. The tape continued turning, carrying the truth forward second by second, towards something no one in Calder Ridge had ever heard. Beside her, the stranger did not move, did not breathe loudly, only listened, as the past prepared to reveal what 50 years of silence had tried to hide. ACT4 when silence breaks. The sound on the tape did not stop after that single moment. It stretched forward into a quiet so deep it felt heavier than the storm itself. Rain still struck the roof. Wind still pressed against the walls. But inside the recording something had changed in a way that could never be undone. Aloan sat perfectly still beside the desk, her hands resting lightly against the edge as if the smallest movement might interrupt the past. The lantern beside her flickered once then steadied. Warm light holding the room together while the truth unfolded. On the tape, breathing could be heard. Uneven. Close to the microphone. Not Corvin's. Someone else remained in the room. Seconds passed slowly, each one carrying the weight of 50 silent years. Then a voice spoke again. Lower now. Shaken in a way it had not been before. I didn't mean for this to happen. The words trembled with something real. Not anger. Not power. Something closer to fear finally rising after it was already too late. Aloan felt her chest tighten. Because regret inside a voice often arrives only after truth cannot be changed. No answer came from Corvin Hale. Only the storm. Only breath. Only the soft shifting of movement that suggested a body on the floor. The tape continued. A chair scraped faintly. Footsteps moved across wood. Slow. Uncertain. As if the person inside the room no longer trusted the ground beneath them. Then another sound entered the recording. So quiet it might have been missed. A second set of footsteps. Aloan's eyes lifted toward the stranger across from her. But the stranger did not look surprised. Only sad. As though this moment had lived inside them for many years. On the tape, a new voice whispered. What did you do? Young. Unsteady. Filled with disbelief. The first voice answered nothing. Rain grew louder. Or maybe silence had grown thinner. The younger voice spoke again. Barely breathing. You said you only wanted to talk. Still no reply. Aloan felt something shift inside her understanding. The night had never belonged to just two people. There had always been someone else. Someone hidden by storm and darkness. Someone the town never knew existed. The witness had not only seen. It had heard. On the tape, the younger voice began to cry quietly, trying not to be heard. trying to hold together a moment already broken. "We have to call someone," they whispered. "We have to fix this." The older voice finally returned. "Flat. Empty. Nothing can fix this." A long pause followed, filled with rain and the fragile sound of a life realizing it had crossed a line it could never step back from. Then the younger voice asked the question that had waited 50 years to be heard. "What do we do now?" Aloan felt her heartbeat echo inside her ears, because the answer to that question had shaped half a century of silence. The older voice spoke slowly, each word chosen like a stone placed carefully into deep water. "We make sure no one ever knows." The storm covered the quiet that followed, but it could not erase the meaning. Aloan closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, only to feel the truth settle completely. The town had not forgotten by accident. It had been protected, deliberately, from the very beginning. On the tape, movement returned, fabric shifting, weight lifting, something being carried across the room. The younger voice whispered through tears, "Please, we don't have to do this." No answer. Footsteps moved farther away, toward what must have been the back door, toward rain and river and darkness wide enough to hide anything. Then, the recording changed. Sound opened into the storm outside. Wind stronger, rain harder, water rushing somewhere close. The river. Aloan's hands tightened slightly against the desk, because every search in 1975 had followed that river, and every search had failed. On the tape, the younger voice cried out once, not loud, but full of something breaking beyond repair. After that, only storm. Minutes passed with nothing else. No words, no returned footsteps, just rain falling over a truth already disappearing into night. Then, a final sound, very close to the recorder, so soft it felt almost private. The younger voice again, barely more than breath. "I'm sorry." The tape clicked softly, and silence returned. Real silence, present silence, the kind that exists after truth has finally spoken everything it can. The player continued turning for a few empty seconds before stopping completely. Aloan did not move. The room around her slowly returned. Lantern light, dust in the air, the quiet presence of the stranger waiting across the desk. But nothing felt the same as it had before the tape began. 50 years of questions now carried shape and sound and human voices. No longer mystery. No longer legend. Only truth. Her throat felt tight when she finally spoke. Two people. Not one. The stranger nodded once. Yes. Aloan searched her memory. Old newspaper fragments. Faded reports. Every version of the story the town had allowed to exist. No mention of anyone else. No second witness. No second life tied to that night. Who was the younger voice? She asked. The stranger's eyes lowered briefly. Not hiding. Only carrying weight. Someone the town chose to protect more carefully than the truth itself. Aloan felt a quiet realization forming. Slow. Unavoidable. A child. She whispered. Not a child. The stranger said gently, but young enough that losing everything would have destroyed more than one life. Silence settled again. Heavy but honest. Outside, the last light of evening faded from the sky. Darkness touching the clear upstairs window for the first time since she arrived. What happened after? Aloan asked. The stranger looked toward the lantern flame. The river carried the secret, and the town carried the silence. Years passed. People aged. Memories blurred. But guilt does not follow the same rules as time. Their voice softened. Some witnesses never stop seeing, even when they close their eyes. Aloan understood then. You were there. The stranger did not answer with words. They only met her gaze. And in that quiet meeting, truth finished revealing itself. Not just guardian of the tape. Not just messenger waiting in an empty house. But the younger voice. The one who had whispered "I'm sorry" into the storm. 50 years older. Still carrying the night inside them. Aloan felt no anger. Only a deep human sadness for the weight one moment can place on an entire lifetime. Why tell the truth now? She asked softly. Because silence was starting to feel like another crime. The stranger said. And because you know how to carry stories without letting them disappear. The words settled gently between them. Outside, wind moved through the trees along Willow Bend Road. The same road that had watched 50 years pass without answers. Inside the quiet room, truth had finally spoken aloud. But one question still remained. What would happen when the town heard it too? Night settled fully over Calder Ridge. Darkness moved across the river and along the empty highway until even the diner lights felt distant from the world. Inside the quiet room at the top of the White House, the lantern continued to burn with a steady, patient glow, as if it had been waiting many years for this final conversation. Aloan sat without speaking, not searching for more answers, only allowing the truth she had heard to find its place inside her. Some stories arrive like thunder, sudden and impossible to ignore, but this one had arrived like snowfall, slow, quiet, covering everything that once seemed certain. Across the desk, the older figure who had carried the secret for half a lifetime remained still, not relieved, not broken, simply present in a way that suggested exhaustion deeper than sleep. For 50 years, they had lived beside a single moment, a single sound in the storm, a single choice that could never be taken back. Aloan finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. The town deserves to know. The words did not carry judgment, only truth. The older figure closed their eyes briefly, as if listening to something far away. Perhaps the river, perhaps the echo of a younger voice that still lived somewhere in memory. When they opened their eyes again, there was no resistance left. Yes, they said quietly. It does. Silence followed. But this silence felt different from all the others. Not protective. Not fearful. Complete. Aloan looked toward the small cassette player resting beside the lantern. The thin plastic held nothing extraordinary to the eye. Yet inside it lived the exact shape of truth. Unchanged by time. Unaffected by forgetting. What happens now? She asked. The answer came slowly, like someone placing each word carefully into the future. Now, we stop hiding. Outside, wind moved gently through the tall grass around the house. No longer restless. No longer searching. Just moving forward. The way time always had. Morning in Calder Ridge arrived quietly. Soft grey light spread across Willow Bend Road, touching the peeling paint of the White House, the clear upstairs window, the porch that had waited half a century for footsteps to return. This time, the door opened from the inside. Two figures stepped out into the cold early air, one carrying a small wooden box, the other carrying nothing visible, only the steady calm of someone who had finally reached the end of a long road. They walked toward the town without hurry, past silent trees, past the river that no longer needed to keep its secret. By the time the diner lights flickered on, people had already begun to notice something unusual. Not noise, not danger, presence. Truth has a way of being felt before it is understood. Inside the sheriff's office, dust rose from shelves that had not been touched in years. Old files opened. Yellowed pages unfolded. Names and dates returning to the light after decades in darkness. No one spoke loudly. No one argued. Because somewhere deep inside, the town had always known silence was never the same as peace. When the recording finally played within those walls, no storm covered the sound. No river carried it away. Every word remained. Clear. Human. Unavoidable. Some people cried quietly. Some stared at the floor. Some closed their eyes as if seeing the past for the first time. But no one denied what they heard. The truth did not ask permission. It simply existed. By afternoon, news traveled beyond Calder Ridge, across counties, across state lines, carried by voices and screens and quiet conversations between strangers. A mystery unsolved for 50 years. Now answered. Yet the answer did not feel like victory, only understanding, because the truth revealed something deeper than a single crime. It revealed how fear can grow inside silence, how protection can slowly become prison, how one moment can echo across generations if never spoken aloud. Near the river bank, where search teams once walked in circles beneath cold rain, a small gathering formed as evening approached. No ceremony, no speeches prepared, just people, standing together where questions had once lived. The wooden box rested on a simple table. Beside it, fresh white flowers moved gently in the wind. Eloan stood a short distance away, watching without needing to be seen. She had not come for recognition, only to listen, and to carry the story until it could stand on its own. Beside the table, the older figure who had once been the hidden witness faced the quiet crowd. Their hands trembled slightly, not from fear of judgment, but from the release of holding something too long. When they spoke, their voice was steady. I was young. I was afraid. And I believed silence would protect everyone. A long breath moved through the gathered people. Shared. Human. But silence protects nothing. They continued. It only waits. No one interrupted. Because truth spoken without defense needs no argument. The river moved softly behind them. No longer hiding. Only flowing forward toward places beyond memory. When the words ended, nothing dramatic followed. No applause. No anger. Only quiet acceptance. The kind that arrives when a wound is finally cleaned instead of covered. As dusk settled, candles appeared one by one along the river's edge. Small lights against growing dark. Not to erase the past, but to acknowledge it. Eloan felt a gentle warmth rise in her chest. Not happiness. Something calmer. Completion. For the first time since the letters arrived, the pull that had guided her here began to loosen. Her work in Calder Ridge was ending. Later that night, she returned alone to the White House on Willow Bend Road. The rooms felt different now. Still old. Still quiet. But no longer waiting. Upstairs, the lantern had been extinguished. Its purpose fulfilled. Moonlight entered through the clear window, spreading pale silver across the empty floor. Eloan stood there for a long moment, listening. No hidden movement. No restless memory turning in sleep. Only peace. Simple and real. She understood something then. The silent witness had never truly been the tape, or the house, or even the river. It had been time itself, holding truth patiently until someone was ready to hear it. And now, at last, someone had. Before leaving, she placed the folded photograph on the windowsill, the one showing summer light and a shadow behind the glass. Not as evidence, not as mystery, but as reminder that even the longest silence can end. Outside, stars filled the wide American sky, clear, endless, unafraid of darkness. Eloan walked down the porch steps and onto the quiet road, carrying only her suitcase once more. No letters waited ahead. No hidden stories calling her name. Just the simple open distance of tomorrow. At the edge of town, she paused briefly, looking back toward the river. The diner lights. The small White House now resting peacefully among trees. Some places hold sorrow. Some hold memory. And a rare few hold the moment when truth finally chooses to speak. Calder Ridge would never be the same. But for the first time in 50 years, it would be honest. Eloan stepped onto the empty highway as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. Soft gold spreading across the quiet world. A new day beginning. Unburdened. Unhidden. Behind her, the town continued forward. Not forgetting, but no longer afraid to remember. And somewhere deep within the gentle movement of time, the silence that had waited half a century was finally at rest.